G'day. Quite some time ago I bought this machine here, the Book 8088, and it has turned out to be quite a useful machine to take on trips and be able to play MS-DOS games on the go. But it does have some downsides. One of the most obvious ones being it's a bit slow because it's only an 8088, so there's a lot of DOS games that I can't play. So recently I bought this machine here, the Pocket386. Today we're going to take a look at this little beast and see how it goes. We'll play with some games and record those, and I'll give you my opinion at the end. Let's take a look.
The Pocket386 is essentially a successor to the Hand 386. It has the same Ali M6117 system-on-a-chip processor that is basically a 386SX running at about 40 MHz. This comes alongside about 8 MB of RAM, a compact flash card for storage, an OPL3 sound card built in, and a USB port for additional external storage. When you order one of these machines, it may come with one of 3 different graphics cards: a Cirrus Logic GD54 series card, a Trident 9000 series card, or a Chips F655 series card. In my case, I got a Cirrus Logic card with about 512K of video RAM. The image here is from Ars Technica. I wasn't keen on disassembling mine again after having to deal with some reliability issues that I'll discuss later. Anyhow, the specs make this machine roughly the equivalent of an early 1990s 386SX machine, being a relatively fast one at roughly 40 MHz. It doesn't have the capability of playing some more advanced games like Doom, well, at least the vanilla Doom, so it's much more suitable for earlier 90s games which don't require the performance of a 486 or better. Another thing that's going to come up repeatedly is the lack of Sound Blaster support, which I think is pretty self-explanatory. You get a few other things in the box with the computer as well. You get a dongle for the parallel port in case you want to use that, and you get another dongle that allows you to connect an external VGA screen and PS2 keyboard and mouse. It comes with this cheap looking power supply that I recommend you don't use. I myself have plenty of 12 volt adapters around the house, so I just grabbed one of those and it worked perfectly fine. Just make sure you've got the right voltage and the right polarity. The unit also comes with basic instructions that tell you how to use the machine. They're fairly short and don't go into too much detail, but they're still quite useful. The other things that I'd recommend you get are a compact flash card reader, so you can put files onto the compact flash cards. It does have a USB port, but I've found that that's more difficult to use than it needs to be. It's far easier to load what you want directly onto the compact flash card. I also noticed that my system got a bit hot around where the CPU is, so I bought a little heatsink to attach to the CPU. Hopefully that will reduce the amount of heat buildup that occurs in that area, although there's not much ventilation, so we'll see how it goes. The last extra thing I got was a replacement motherboard for my machine. When I got my machine, it ran quite well for a little while. The machine started to act up and it wouldn't boot properly. I eventually located the problem in the mainboard's power circuitry. I think I might be able to fix it on this original board, which appears to work if you power it on its own. It'll be nice to have a spare if I can get it going, but otherwise the replacement I got has worked very well so far. Fingers crossed, it continues to do so. So here we are playing some DOS games on the Pocket386. You may notice that the display does not look quite right, and I think this is because of a combination of the camera on my phone not working properly, the angle at which the screen is towards the camera, and maybe a little bit of the lighting. In person, the screen looks much better. Although not perfect, it's pretty close to what you would see on old hardware. The first game here is Jill of the Jungle, and the game here runs quite well. The audio sounds reasonable, although a little tinny through these speakers, but otherwise it's smooth and does what you expect. The part that fails here is unfortunately the controls, and it's mostly the jumping that fails. So when you go to press the jump key, you have a pretty much 50-50 chance whether Jill will jump or not, and that makes it very unplayable. It should come as no surprise that Zargon also has the same issue with its controls. I also note that these games both don't have any sound effects, and I think it's because it expects to have Sound Blaster support if you have a music card. It would have been nice if we could have had PC Speaker as a fallback when digitized sound wasn't available, but for these epic games that is not the case. Dark Ages doesn't suffer from the same issues with its keyboard controls, and it actually plays really well. Also note that it supports both PC speaker sound as well as the ad-lib music. The PC speaker sound comes from an internal piezo speaker though, so you can't get that to come out through a powered speaker or something else. And that also means that you don't have any option but to mute it if you don't want anyone else to hear it. Alien Carnage also works quite well. I didn't have any trouble with the controls. But here, you'd only get PC speaker sound. It seems that it will only let you have ad-lib music if you also have Sound Blaster digitized effects. I found Hocus Pocus worked really well, and I didn't have any control issues. It also allows you to have both ad-lib sound and PC speaker sound as well. Commander Keen worked exceptionally well. Both the sound and the graphics worked well, with no artifacts that you see on some graphics cards. For the most part, Tyrion is pretty good. The graphics look great, and the music sounds good, but you don't get any sound effects because of the lack of Sound Blaster support, and you will find the game struggles in busier parts of the game. Raptor Call of the Shadows doesn't seem to suffer from slowdown like Tyrion does, and the controls and sound seem to work fairly well here. Wolfenstein 3D works really quite well. The frame rate is smooth and the game plays really well. The ad-lib sound effects aren't quite as good as the Sound Blaster digital effects, however, and the cramped keyboard does make it a bit more difficult to play. Corridor 7 works fairly well, although not quite as smooth as Wolfenstein 3D. This demo doesn't have any sound, so I can't really test that, but I would assume on the full version you would get ad-lib sound. Jetpack also played really well. The only real difference is that the ad-lib sound replaces the digitized effects, which is a little bit less fun, but still quite a good experience. David Murray's game Attack of the Petsky Robots works really well on this machine. There were no issues with the controls, audio, or graphics. I do enjoy playing Tetris, and yet here is one of my favourite clones. Unsurprisingly, it plays really quite well on this machine. SimCity plays much better than it did on the Book 8088. I don't seem to have any trouble with the keyboard controls, but it is hard to get it to scroll to where you want it to go. I think mouse controls would probably solve that issue. Duke Nukem 1 is only unplayable because the controls don't work as expected all the time. Essentially what happens is sometimes your keys will stick and you'll keep going in a direction when you intend to stop. God of Thunder supports both the PC speaker sound effects and ad-lib music. I didn't have any trouble with the controls and it played quite well. The simulation game F-117A Nighthawk plays exceptionally well on this machine. You can only choose either PC speaker or ad-lib for sound, and they both generally sound pretty good, even the digitized effects.
So we've had a look at how some games go on this machine when you're using it as a mobile device, and most of them actually work reasonably well, but although there are a few that don't like the keyboard, and the fact that there's no Sound Blaster support really sort of makes this machine suffer. But there are a few other sorts of things that I think also are a bit of a downside to this machine. I actually think its size is one of them. If you compare it to the Book 8088, it is significantly smaller. Now, the size being smaller would normally be great because that would mean it's easier to transport, but the main issue it causes for me is the tiny keyboard. These cursor keys are so small that my fingers collide into each other trying to use it. And in general, the keys just feel a bit too small. Whereas if you compare that to the Book 8088, the keys are actually quite a decent size and very usable. Another difference between the two, just basically because of the size, is the speakers on the Book 8088 are actually better than those on the Pocket386. And that's basically down to how small they are. The speakers just occupy this tiny little grill here and nothing else. And that makes them really tinny sounding, and the ad-lib audio doesn't come across very well out of them. I really recommend you use a pair of headphones or external speakers if you're playing with sound.
I also tried out the games using the external screen keyboard and mouse, which you connect to the machine via a dongle. Most of the games played exactly the same, although many of them had an improved experience because of having a better keyboard and better speakers, although the speakers I've got on this screen aren't particularly good. Because of this, I won't show all of the games running, just those that have a different experience. First up is Jill of the Jungle and Zargon. Both of these games played much better, mostly because of the external keyboard. You can now control the main characters and play through a level without any trouble. The external keyboard also resolved the issues I had with Duke Nukem 1, making this game very playable. I actually forgot to try out Magiduck before, but I would expect it to work as well as it does here. Exceptionally well. Overkill is another game that I forgot to try out before. It works quite well with the external devices. The internal keyboard is not suitable for a game like Civilization, or Colonization for that matter, but if you do hook up external devices, it does play very well. Lastly, I tried to get this machine to run Doom. Sadly, it's not quite fast enough to run the vanilla version of the game, but it does seem to run fast Doom reasonably well. You do have to compromise the display details a little bit to get it to run smoothly, but you can get a playable experience. Unfortunately, the lack of digitized sound does detract from the experience a little bit.
So, reliability issues have marred the experience with the Pocket386. It is otherwise actually a pretty nifty little machine. It has a bit extra battery life over the Pocket8088. When I tested it, this got about 3 hours runtime just sitting there playing Commander Keen. It does have a nice OPL3 sound, although the internal speakers are not great. You can always plug in a set of headphones. It does play most DOS games from the era fairly well, but anything that requires a faster machine is going to struggle. Tyrion in particular struggled on this one. If I had to have an ideal machine, it would actually be kind of a combination of the two of these. It would have the form factor of the Book 8088 because this one has a nicer keyboard and nicer speakers, and I do actually prefer to have the real ports on the back of the machine, such as this one does. It's got a real serial and real parallel port. I do like this machine because it has better battery life and you can play more DOS games on it. Not so relevant when I'm doing development work that requires a slower machine, but when I'm trying to play a game, the extra speed is good. Of course though, it's not fast enough to play anything really advanced like Doom or Descent or anything like that. For that you probably want a 486 or faster, and there are plenty of vintage hardware in those sort of categories to buy rather than a hobbyist sort of machine like this. But it is good for what it does, so I will be keeping it for that. Anyhow, that's pretty much all I have to say about the Pocket386. I'd like to thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.